They told me the grand cathedral had no shadows, that its thousands of candles, its stained glass windows, its oil-burning censers would keep the dark forever at bay. That was the first lie the healing church ever told me. Tonight, Yharnam lies drowned in a red moonlight that does not wane, and the cathedral is darker than I have ever seen it. The shadows here are not born of absence, but of presence. The presence of something older than flame, older than man, older even than the church itself. I am writing this for the one who finds me. I am writing with a quill cut from the bone of a beast I once called brother, and with ink distilled from my own blood. I am not certain there will be enough of either to finish. It began on a winter's night, when the bells did not toll for prayer, but for arrival. I was an archivist then, not yet inducted into the choir's higher mysteries, but far enough in the church's service to be summoned when relics arrived from the outer provinces. The streets beyond the cathedral district were silent, muffled under frost and fog. The relic came in a coffin, not the gilded reliquaries of saints, not the glass ampoules of preserved marrow. A coffin, iron-bound and scarred from transport. Its bearers wore masks of stitched leather, their eyes hidden by smoked glass. Each step they took was in perfect rhythm. 4 beats, then pause, 4 beats, then pause. The same rhythm as the old funeral marches of Yharnam's forgotten age. The high cleric did not greet them. He knelt, and that is when I saw it. Something moved in the cathedral rafters, not the shuffle of rats or the coo of pigeons. The rafters bent, as though the roof itself had breathed in. Between the beams, something vast shifted, its outline distorted, never entirely in one place at a time. My eyes ached to follow it. No one else looked up. Perhaps no one else dared. The coffin was set before the altar. Locks were undone. Hinges groaned. And there it was. The relic. A glass vessel, the size of a man's heart, filled with blood that steamed in the cold air. It pulsed faintly, like the beating of a distant drum. Even from where I stood, I smelled the sea. "This," the high cleric whispered, "is the cure." The first to receive the blood was a child, no more than 9 winters old, pale as milk and near to death. The clerics lifted her into the light of the altar and pushed the needle into her vein. The moment the blood entered her body, she laughed, high and clear, like chimes in the wind, and then her jaw unhinged. Her laughter deepened into something inhuman, something that echoed not from her lungs, but from the rafters above. For a heartbeat, her mouth was not a mouth, but a wound into somewhere else, and I saw movement there. The clerics restrained her gently, whispering litanies I had never heard before, as though this were a holy sign, not a warning. The high cleric turned to me, his face pale with awe. "You will write of this night," he said, "for it is the beginning." And so I wrote. But tonight, as I put pen to paper once more, I hear the bells toll again. Not from the tower, but from deep beneath the cathedral floor. And the pattern they toll is the same as the coffin-bearer's steps. 4 beats. Pause. 4 beats. Pause. The blood was never meant to be mere liquid. It was scripture, liturgy, covenant, a sacred text written not with ink, but with veins and pulse. After that night, the healing church rewrote everything. The ancient rites that once celebrated water and wine were abandoned, replaced with sermons on the sanctity of blood transfusion. The chalice was no longer for wine, but for the sacred crimson. The needle replaced the communion wafer. I walked the endless halls of the church's blood libraries, hidden deep beneath the cathedral, where rows upon rows of translucent vials glowed faintly in the gloom. Each one was catalogued not by name, but by cryptic symbols, spirals, crescents, sigils that I had seen only once before, in a dream that had no beginning or end. The librarians, ancient women wrapped in veils of spun gold and rust, moved silently, chanting numerals from the Binharik Codex. Their voices were thin, like smoke rising from burnt offerings. At first, the transfusions worked miracles. The sick would rise, healed of fever and fracture. The blood's warmth was a balm, a flickering hearth in the endless cold of Yharnam's nights. But the blood began to speak, not in words, but in urgings. A slow, creeping insistence that stirred beneath the skin. The patients dreamed of cities built of bone and coral beneath oceans of darkness. They woke with eyes like polished glass, staring too long at the walls as if listening to some silent choir. Physicians became priests, and the sawbones donned the vestments of the confessors. Medical instruments were inscribed with prayers. The sanctity of the surgical theatre rivaled that of the holiest sanctums. I, too, was not immune. The blood in my veins throbbed with unfamiliar rhythms, a pulse like distant thunder beneath the streets. I found myself tracing the symbols in the margins of the church's records, spirals curling into crescents, crescents folding into stars. One night, as I copied an ancient transfusion log, I paused. In the dim candlelight, I saw a note inscribed in fresh ink. It was my own handwriting, but I do not remember writing it. The note read simply, "Prepare for the choir's call. The descent is near." I stared into the shadows of the archive. The air grew colder. The faint, endless tolling of the bells echoed through the stone corridors. But now I understood their source was not above. Beneath. The choir's voice whispered in my mind, and the blood in my veins sang in answer. The church's doctrine had become something else, not salvation, but summons. And I knew that the next step was to answer the call. They call themselves the choir, not a congregation, not a band of singers, but a sanctum within the church whose eyes have become windows to other realms. The first time I stood before them, I felt my breath freeze in my chest. Their faces were veiled, but not to hide shame or secrecy. Their veils obscured eyes that no longer belonged to this world. They shimmered with shifting patterns, constellations of pain and revelation. Their language was not spoken, but intoned, a half-whispered litany that tangled with the silence of the cathedral. They spoke of communion, but not the communion of the blood I knew. It was a joining beyond flesh, beyond time, a communion of minds and blood threads that stretched across the Empyrean. I was brought to their orphanage, a place the church does not list on any map. There, children slept in beds lined with woven silver and bone. Their breaths were shallow, but their eyes gleamed with an unnatural light. From hidden alcoves, I heard them hum a hymn, the very same pattern as the bells that toll beneath the cathedral, 4 beats, a pause, repeated endlessly. The choir fed the children with a strange milk drawn from deep beneath the cathedral. It smelled faintly of salt and rust. I asked what it was. They answered with a smile, too slow, too knowing. "It is the gift of the great ones. They watch from the depths." My heart beat like a drum in my ears as they spoke of the first descent. A rite I had only ever heard whispered in nightmares. When they bade me prepare, I knew that the path below awaited. beneath the bells, beneath the blood, beneath the prayers. Something ancient stirred, and it was calling. The catacombs beneath Yharnam are older than the stones of the cathedral itself. They are carved deep into the bedrock, labyrinthine tunnels and chambers filled with stale air thick with salt and copper tang. The further we went, the heavier the silence grew, until it was no longer absence of sound, but the presence of a waiting breath. I walked alongside the physicians, their robes dusted with ash, and the faintest shimmer of arcane sigils. Their hands moved in ritual precision, carrying a coffin filled with the relic blood. The coffin's iron clasps bit into their palms, but none faltered. The walls bore murals, faded but vivid, hunters bowing before creatures with limbs folded and faces shrouded in darkness, tentacles curling like serpents in prayer. The murals whispered of a covenant older than Yharnam, older than any church doctrine. A cold breeze followed us, though no tunnel opened to the outside. I tasted brine on the air, felt a dampness cling to my skin like a second layer. Shadows in the torchlight moved counter to their sources, twisting where logic said they should be still. One physician spoke only once. "Do not look beyond the veil." I wished I had obeyed. At the chamber's heart, the coffin was set down. The lid, blackened and scarred, began to shift. Not by hand, but as though breathing. Then I heard it, my voice, not from my mouth, but from inside the coffin. My own words, spoken in a tongue I did not understand, echoed from the dark. The physicians stepped back, faces hidden behind ritual masks, their breaths shallow. The coffin's lid creaked wider, a faint steam rising from within, smelling of seaweed and forgotten dreams. I wanted to look away, but the sound pulled me forward, deeper into the maw of a secret, older than the church itself. The descent was not only downwards through stone, but into a truth that would unmake me. We reached a cavern unlike any I had seen, vast, silent, and swollen with a sickly light. Before us lay a pool of water so pale it resembled diluted milk, its surface glassy and unnervingly still. Beneath that surface pulsed a network of veins, pale and thick, like roots that fed into the very heart of the earth. The physicians approached solemnly, their robes whispering across the stone floor. With practiced hands, they submerged the coffin into the pool, and the water rippled. But strangely, the waves moved as though in slow motion, stretching time into a liquid drag. I felt a tug at my soul, an almost irresistible pull to step into that well of pale veins, to let the water claim me. One physician turned, eyes sunken behind ritual veils, voice a rasp. "The blood sees you. It knows your fear." I glanced down and saw my own hand bleeding, though no wound marred my skin. The drops fell into the pool, darkening the milk for a heartbeat before fading away. Across the water's surface, the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting, as though the cavern itself inhaled. Then, glimpses flickered beneath the depths. Impossible architecture rising from the pool's black heart, towers and spires entwined with rib-like arches, stretching upward into a void that swallowed even the faintest torchlight. Cold settled beneath my ribs, creeping into the marrow. I thought of the hymns sung in the orphanage, the strange milk given to children, and the tolling bells beneath the cathedral. The pool began to drain, slow and deliberate, revealing a spiraling staircase carved from bone-white stone, descending beyond reach of light or hope. The physicians looked to me, solemn and expectant. "Will you follow?" they asked. I had no choice but to nod. The spiraling staircase ended in a chamber carved from stone, as white as bone, and cold as death itself. Here lay the tomb of the first vicar, the man who, centuries before, had first drunk the sacred blood and vanished into legend. The chamber's air was thick with the scent of incense, and something far older, something sour and briny, like a wound left open to the sea. At the center rested a corpse, impossibly tall, limbs bent at unnatural angles, skin stretched taut over sinew that gleamed pale as polished ivory. His jaw was fused shut, but the angles suggested a permanent grimace. Or perhaps a silent scream trapped beneath flesh and bone. The choir's physicians told me he was not dead, but transformed. A cocoon for ascension into a higher form, a bridge between man and the great ones. I dared to move closer. The vicar's jaw shifted, grinding slowly as though chewing on thoughts long since forgotten. The choir began the anointing. Sacred relic blood poured carefully over his skin, pooling in crevices that seemed to drink it like thirst unending. As the first drop touched the corpse, the statues lining the chamber, figures carved to resemble the first congregation of the church, began to stir. Their stone heads turned, one by one, eyes cracking open, not with light, but with a darkness so deep it swallowed the chamber whole. A cold wind rushed through the tomb, carrying whispers in a tongue that should not exist, a language older than any human tongue, spoken by creatures whose names are blasphemy. One physician collapsed, face locked in a rapturous agony, blood seeping from his eyes and mouth. The vicar's chest rose, just once, with a breath that was not his own. And in that moment I understood. This was not a resurrection. It was an awakening. The statues exhaled, not stone grinding against stone, but breath, warm and wet, rolling out like smoke from unseen mouths. Dust fell in slow spirals from their cracked lips, drifting in the stale air like falling ash. Their eyes opened, not lifeless hollows, but milky orbs swirling with star fields and constellations I could not name. I stood frozen, heart thundering in my chest, as the choir's chant escalated into a fevered crescendo. One statue's head tilted toward me, eyes alight with a terrible knowing. The physician beside me faltered, collapsing suddenly, his face twisted in an expression of ecstasy and terror. Blood welled from his mouth and eyes in rivulets that gleamed like ink. The cold wind swept through the chamber again, though the tomb had no door, no opening to the outside world. It whispered my true name, a name I had never spoken aloud, yet recognized as my own. The shadows coiled tighter, wrapping around my limbs, drawing me closer to the vicar's risen form. The air grew thick with the scent of brine and burning stars, as if the Empyrean itself had cracked open and spilled its innards into the chamber. I wanted to scream, to run, but my voice was stolen, swallowed by the chorus of stone and blood. The statues stepped forward, and the tomb fell into darkness. I fled the tomb, the weight of unseen eyes pressing into my back. Deeper still, I found a flooded hall, its water so still it mirrored the moon above perfectly. Yet we were far beneath the surface, where no moonlight should reach. The reflection was impossible. The moon's face in the water was swollen, bloated like a black sun, veined with angry red lines. Ripples distorted the image, twisting the reflected city into a grotesque parody of Yharnam's streets. But it was not beasts that prowled this reflected city. They were worshippers, kneeling, eyeless, their mouths open in silent prayer to something I dared not name. I dipped my fingers into the water and saw visions, Yharnam burning beneath that swollen moon, the church's great spires crumbling into blood. A cold dread crawled beneath my skin as the reflected creatures turned their gaze to me, their eyeless faces breaking into impossible smiles. The bells tolled again, echoing through the water and into my bones. I realized, with a horror that unspooled my very mind, that the blood we worshipped was not merely a cure, it was an invitation. And the great ones were coming. The choir's agents found me before I could descend further. Their veils hid faces I could not bear to see, eyes glimmering with cold knowledge. They did not speak, only gestured, and I followed like a lamb to slaughter. We arrived at the orphanage, a place hidden within the twisting corridors of the cathedral. Children lay in beds crafted from bone and silver, their breaths shallow but steady. Their eyes shone with a terrible light, not human, but something else. Each child bore the same birthmark, a crescent moon with a single eye at its center, the symbol of the choir's secret communion. The children hummed a hymn I recognized instantly. The same pattern as the bells tolling beneath the cathedral, 4 beats, a pause, repeated endlessly. I was offered a chalice filled with blood so pure it shimmered like liquid fire. "This is the blood of the Great One," a choir member intoned softly. "Only through it will you hear the voice." I hesitated, the chalice heavy in my hands. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in rhythm with my pounding heart. The floor beneath me turned translucent, revealing the well of pale veins directly below, its milk-white surface swirling with dark roots. The choir's chanting grew louder, voices merging into a single hypnotic command. A single drop of blood fell from the chalice to my lips. I tasted the abyss. The drop burned as it slid down my throat. Fire and ice entwined, ancient and unknowable. My senses fractured, stretching beyond the walls of the orphanage, beyond the cathedral, beyond Yharnam itself. I saw him, the first vicar, risen from his tomb, a towering silhouette against the blood-red sky. His limbs moved with unnatural grace, each step warping the very air around him. The streets beneath him writhed, people collapsed, veins glowing with an eerie light, their bodies convulsed, caught between agony and ecstasy. The moon above swelled, a great orb veined with raw crimson, pulling at the tides of blood within every living thing. I felt my own flesh shift, bones creaking, skin stretching as if reborn. My heartbeat matched the hymn of the choir, a chant older than the city, older than memory. But the words were not praise, they were command, and I was obeying. The choir's voices filled my mind, binding me to their will. The ascension had begun, and there was no turning back. The streets of Yharnam ran red, and not with rain or rust, but with living blood. The tide defied gravity, flowing uphill, thick and slow, a river of life and death entwined. Bodies, both living and dead, were caught in its current, faces twisted in rapture and terror, merging and dissolving into one another. I was swept away, carried by the relentless tide towards the grand cathedral, its spires looming like monoliths carved from bone and shadow. Above the altar, the first vicar stood, his form shifting and indistinct, a silhouette against a pulsing rift that tore the very fabric of space. The blood rose in a crimson column, vanishing into that impossible tear, feeding some dark hunger beyond comprehension. Through the rift, I glimpsed a city the likes of which Yharnam was built to hide, an abyssal metropolis of coral and teeth, bathed in perpetual darkness. And then the rift sealed, leaving a silence so deep it swallowed all hope. The tide was not receding. The rift sealed with a sound like the shattering of 1,000 bones. Before me lay the city beneath the sea, an empire carved from coral and calcified bone, its towers spiraling into the black, crushing sky of eternal night. The streets were paved with teeth, and every shadow writhed with shapes half seen and wholly dreaded. At its center, a black sun pulsed, a heart beating to a rhythm older than time itself. There, the Great One waited, not sleeping, but watching. Eyes like fathomless voids stared up through the rift, piercing through the veil that separates worlds. The Healing Church's mission was never to heal. It was to open the gate. And I, the archivist, am the final keystone. The blood within me pulses in sync with that black sun, a curse and a calling intertwined. I am no longer fully man, nor wholly something else. As the silence thickens, and the city's dark tides rise, I whisper my final words into the void. The tide is not receding. And somewhere, far beyond sight, the abyss stirs again. The cathedral stands silent, but the echoes do not rest. In the empty halls, shadows lengthen without source, stretching like reaching hands toward unseen horrors. The blood that once promised salvation now stains every stone, a reminder etched into the very bones of Yharnam. I wander the empty sanctums, hearing the distant choir, not singing praises, but mourning dirges carved from despair. Voices drift through the darkness, whispers in a language fractured by time and madness. The children, once bright with unnatural light, are gone, consumed by the abyss, or transformed into something beyond memory. I carry their names on my tongue, but they slip like water through cracked fingers. Outside, the city festers beneath the swollen moon, its people shadows of their former selves, eyes glazed with unknowable terror. The blood's song haunts the night, a hymn without end, a summons never answered, and beneath it all, the black sun pulses, waiting, patient, eternal. I am the last to bear witness, yet I know this is no end. The curse is endless, the tide eternal. The echoes will rise again. The cathedral no longer holds prayer, only silence, a silence so dense it presses into my ears, drowning the faintest heartbeat, suffocating even the whispers of memory. In the sanctuary, the altars stand bare, yet the scent of burnt incense lingers, mingled with something foul, rot and brine beneath the holy smoke. I walk the aisles alone, each step swallowed by the void that has become this place. The choir has vanished, their veils empty husks fluttering in cold draughts that rise from the bowels below. No voices rise in hymn, but I feel their presence, not in body, but in the shuddering of the air itself, a resonance that hums beneath the stone like a dying star's last breath. In my hands, the sacred texts disintegrate to ash, pages curling like the tongues of serpents, words unspooling into forgotten glyphs that flicker just beyond sight. The blood within me thrums with a slow pulse, a heartbeat unbound by time or flesh. A litany echoes in my mind, not spoken but remembered. By the blood we are bound. By the blood we are lost. By the blood we are one. And as the final candle guttered and died, I understood. This was no prayer. It was a requiem for the dead. The tide does not cease. It flows beyond reason, beyond time. A crimson river that washes over all hope, drowning light beneath its endless depths. I am no longer the man who began this record. My flesh is a map of scars and grafts, my mind a fractured mirror reflecting truths too vast to hold. The blood calls endlessly, its voice a siren's hymn beneath the black sun. I hear it in the silence between heartbeats, in the cold breath of the catacombs, in the shimmer of the ruined cathedral's broken windows. The city rots and dreams beneath the swollen moon, its people lost to madness or worse. Transformation into echoes of the Great One's own hunger. I am the final keystone, bearer of the cursed blood, the link between worlds, and as I write these last words, the bells toll once more. Not from the tower, but from the depths below. 4 beats, pause, 4 beats, pause. The tide rises again. There is no salvation, only the endless tide.